of American life to China's role in the heroin epidemic. But first, the showdown at the border continues. For weeks, media outlets explain that the migrant caravan was a hoax designed to boost GOP midterm turnout.
They're telling you the existential threat to America is a bunch of poor refugees 1,000 miles away.
This group of folks, we don't even know where they are. They're way down there.
They've been running on an imaginary caravan.
This stupid caravan. You know, it's a lie that this caravan is a problem of that magnitude.
Right. Programming on the caravan was propaganda.
But now that supposedly made-up caravan has indeed appeared. And the government of Tijuana is begging for help and is calling it a humanitarian crisis. President Trump's own efforts to secure the border are running into obstacles. The president recently blasted the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals for blocking his attempted alterations to American asylum policy.
It's a terrible thing when judges take over your protective services, when they tell you how to protect your border. It's a disgrace. Essentially, they're legislating. They're saying what to do. Some judge sitting in some location very far away is telling our incredible military and law enforcement what to do, and it's not right. I know that Chief Justice Roberts, John Roberts, has been speaking a little bit about it, and I think and I have a lot of respect for him. I like him and I respect him, but I think we have to use some common sense. This Ninth Circuit, everybody knows it. It's totally out of control.
All righty. Well, President Trump is also warning that he may have to shut down the entire U.S.-Mexico border.
If we find that it's uncontrollable, Josh, if we find that it gets to a level where we are going to lose control or where people are going to start getting hurt, we will close entry into the country for a period of time until we can get it under control.
The entire border?
The whole border. I mean, the whole border.
All righty. Well, Chris Hahn is a progressive radio host and former aide to Senator Chuck Schumer. He joins us now. Hey, how you doing, dear?
I'm doing good. Happy Thanksgiving, Tammy.
Same to you. Same to you. So look, obviously, we both have very divergent opinions here on what was going on there. But you would have to admit, I think, that the mayor of Tijuana, this is a town, by the way, that has dealt with immigration a great deal, including with Haitians, who they had said, got jobs there and assimilated very easily. But they're concerned about the violence, and they consider it a humanitarian crisis. Clearly, that's happening in Mexico. What do you say to the mayor of Tijuana when it comes to his attitude? Is he being racist about this, or is this a real genuine problem?
Well, no, he hit the nail on the head. It's a humanitarian crisis, is what I've been saying and other progressives have been saying for the last 3 months. The president has been painting it as an existential threat to our sovereignty as the United States, as if we were being invaded by a foreign country. And if I was a member of the Border Patrol, I would be insulted that the president of the United States did not think that I was capable of doing my job of protecting the border. They've faced these kinds of caravans since the 90s, and this is not new. The president exploited this humanitarian crisis, which it is, for political gain. And I think sometimes he believes his own talking points when he talks about this stuff. And the judge in the Ninth Circuit that he was alluding to, he wasn't making up the law. The president was trying to take a pen to a law that Congress passed and a former president signed. Well, and presidents are not allowed to do that. The judge is just enforcing the law. There's
already a disagreement on that, of course. The president they're going to appeal. He'll certainly prevail here. But in fact, we haven't seen this kind of caravan dynamic. And what we saw, of course, at the Mexico-Guatemala border, Chris, is very indicative of the difference here. The complaint with Tijuana is the violence here, the kind of the nature of what's been going on with this particular caravan. And also, the caravans have not experienced a real commitment at the American border to stop them. So this is inherently different. There are thousands more individuals involved. Now, many have taken Mexico up on their ability to get jobs and to have some health care and to settle in, which is great news. But at this point, you're looking at individuals from, we know there's at least 500 criminals. We know that we've got to be able to at least assess them properly in getting in here. What do you think they should just be allowed to come in, or do you think that there should be an orderly framework here?
I think there should be an orderly framework here. And from what I understand, the people in this caravan are going to seek asylum, which is legally the way you can come here. In one of the ways you can come here legally. So I don't think they're climbing the wall. I don't think we needed to send troops to southern
they're
Texas
climbing the wall right
when
there.
the caravan's actually coming to Tijuana.
They are climbing the wall, as a matter of fact. But let's move on. We do know, yeah. So. They're climbing the fences that exist now, and of course the president is going to make this difficult because we do have to have some order there. And I'm glad you agree that we do have to have some order. Now, look, another thing. I know you want to talk about this, Chris.
Nobody thinks people should be able to climb. Nobody should think people should climb the fence.
Yeah.
No, that's not what we want.
All right. Well, they're also not going to rush, barriers. At any rate, Hillary Clinton ran on continuing high immigration into the U.S., but in an interview with The Guardian, I'm sure you've seen, Hillary suggested it's time for Europe to curb immigration in order to stop the rise of right-wing political parties. She said, quote, I think Europe needs to get a handle on migration because that is what lit the flame. I think it is fair to say Europe has done its part and must send a very clear message. We are not going to be able to continue to provide refuge and support because if we don't deal with the migration issue, it will continue to roil the body politic. Chris, how is this not just transactional politics and throwing immigrants under the bus?
Yeah, I mean, Hillary missed the point there. What's happening in Europe right now is far-right parties are scapegoating these immigrants because they can't figure out a way to deal with the stagnant economy that has hit most of Europe, especially people who are low-skilled workers in Europe. And I think that former Secretary Hillary Clinton missed the point completely there, where she is giving aid and comfort to that thought that far-right parties are expressing in Europe. So I completely disagree with her.
But Chris, many people,
I think it is transactional and it's bad.
But this is the issue, is that many people are shocked at this. This is all she's done. She has been a transactional politician from the beginning. There's no other way that you can explain the Defense of Marriage Act and Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the two worst cases of violating gay American civil rights in the history of this country, when you actually, in the 20th century, decide to shred them because it was transactional. It was going to get them something. Both the Clintons operate this way. This is no different. And this is why she lost in part, because she stands for nothing. The Democrats stand really for nothing at this stage.
Here's the thing, though, Tammy. She's just making a speech and blowing hot air. The president of the United States, when he talks about these things, he's the president of the United States, and his words need to be taken very seriously. I don't like what she said, but I also don't like what's being said by some far-right politicians who hold office in this country who need to tamper down their talk about immigration. Immigration made this country great, and it will continue to make this country great.
It's interesting because that far-right idea is included, apparently, for President Trump getting a DACA deal for Congress, which, of course, the Democrats declined. So are those the kind of far-right ideas that you've got, or historically low unemployment for every group in the country?
Tammy, the president of the United States was offered DACA for the wall. He accepted it until the far-right politicians in the Senate, Mitch McConnell especially, pushed back against it. And General Kelly had to call Chuck Schumer and tell him that the deal was off. So let's be clear. I think that this president will make a deal, DACA for the wall, before this.
Chris, this audience is going to laugh at the idea of Mitch McConnell being a far-right politician. That's very funny. This is the bureaucracy. We both know it well. And it is all transactional. That's what both Democrats and Republicans are reacting to. You had some interesting people elected during the midterms because they're tired of the transactional relationship. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would suggest that she's unusual and interesting. Chris, thanks for joining us.
I think that there's a lot of interesting people with great voices. I can't wait to see them grow.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it'll be interesting. You can see what happened to the Women's March when it comes to that. Chris, thanks for being here. How's this now for irony, you guys? Yesterday, fired FBI Director James Comey tweeted, quote, "Happy Thanksgiving. Got a subpoena from House Republicans. I'm still happy to sit in the light and answer all questions, but I will resist a, quote, closed door thing because I've seen enough of their selective leaking and distortion." It's like he's talking in the mirror, right? "Let's have a hearing and invite everyone to see." Twitter users quickly reminded Comey that he, too, engaged in plenty of selective leaking and private conversations. Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent, an NRA TV contributor, and you know him well. He's also the author of Spygate, the attempted sabotage of Donald J. Trump. He joins us now. Dan, welcome to the program.
Good to be here with you, Tammy. Thanks.
Look, obviously a lot's going on. I think that James Comey beclowned himself with those comments, a little bit of projection on his part. What's your take on what he's trying to accomplish here. The Republicans have done something at the last minute. I would have liked to have seen this 6 months or a year ago.
Yeah.
And now, of course, why not resist, right? Because it's not like you're going to actually end up in front of any committee at this stage.
Yeah, let me hat tip you there for the absolutely perfect use of the word beclown. That is exactly what Jim Comey did here. Tammy, let's point out an irony of Jim Comey's tweet asking for an open hearing up on the Hill. He wants transparency now. You do realize that he hid the investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, the investigation into the Trump team. He hid it from congressional oversight for 8 months. This is a fact. This is not in dispute. In March of 2017, when questioned by congressional oversight, Elise Stefanik from New York specifically, and asked why he hid it for 8 months, he gave the most absurd answer I've ever. He made a fool of himself. He said, well, because the investigation was sensitive.
Right,
Tammy,
right.
The very reason they brief Congress quarterly, not every 8 months, but quarterly on these types of investigations is because they're sensitive.
Yeah.
Comey really needs to dial down the Twitter.
Well, but look, he's gotten away with all of this. This is what's so frustrating. You know, you see this, all right, they're subpoenaing him and they're going to get in, and Comey says, no, I'm not going to go. And he knows he's going to fight it legally. And look, the new session starts on January 3rd. We're getting into the Christmas holiday. He knows that he's going to get away with this. This is, in a way, it is just like a dog and pony show. Are you concerned now that the Democrats will control the House? The Senate still has the Republicans still have the Senate. Are you concerned that, in fact, Donald Trump remains the only man of action, the only individual genuinely interested in clearing this muck up? Because at this point, it's been more of the same for the last 2 years from the Republicans.
I am concerned, but IG Horowitz, Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, gave us an opening in the report on the Hillary email scandal and the horrible handling of it by the DOJ and the FBI that has largely escaped liberal media, purposefully, by the way. At the end of the report, he clearly states that you could not eliminate political bias as a reason for the FBI transitioning so quickly from the Hillary email investigation into the Trump Crossfire Hurricane investigation. What am I saying here? Once this Spygate Crossfire Hurricane IG report comes out on that, which isn't done yet,
right.
I think Jim Comey's in a world of trouble, and he's going to have to answer why they cut out of that July 5th speech he gave the fact that Hillary emailed Barack Obama on that private email.
And look, while the House investigations will end because it'll be the Democrats, there's still the Senate. We still have inspectors general.
Yes.
So there's a lot of ways we can go. And, of course, the FBI documents and classified documents that the president can declassify so Americans can see what's going on. Dan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. Great job.
Thanks, Tammy. No problem.
Thank you. All right. Well, we have a lot of Tucker just ahead as our Inside the Issue special continues. Middle America turned out big for Donald Trump in 2016, but many of them stayed home or changed their votes in 2018. Tucker midterms.
Donald Trump became president 2 years ago thanks largely to a huge surge of support from the American middle class. They supported him because they are dying. As a group, the American middle class is shrinking in absolute terms and in many cases dying younger. So they reached out to the president to help. But in 2018, in the midterms we just had last week, a lot of those voters seem to have drifted back away from the Republicans. The House went Democratic. Republicans lost a bunch of Senate races in states that President Trump won 2 years ago. How did that happen? What should Republicans be doing to change it? And what should be their positions moving forward? No one has watched more carefully than J.D. Vance. He wrote the famous book Hillbilly Elegy. He joins us tonight. J.D., thanks a lot for coming on. So I know it's only been a week, and it takes a while to sort these things out. But, 8 days later, what are the obvious lessons for Republicans from the midterm elections?
So there are two things I'd point to. The first is if you look at the 100 wealthiest House districts, 55 of those were Democratic after the 2016 election. 73 of them were Democratic after the 2018 election. So one of the takeaways is that Republicans are continuing to become the middle and working class party, and Democrats are more and more popular among wealthy suburbanites. The second takeaway is that the single most unpopular piece of Republican legislation in the past couple of years wasn't Donald Trump's brainchild. And if you trust the media reports, Donald Trump wasn't even a huge fan of it. And that was the health care bill that came out of the House Republican leadership. And in poll after poll and person after person that I've talked to, I'm good friends with Mike DeWine, who luckily eked out a win in the Ohio governor's race. The consistent theme is that Republican health care bill actually put a little bit of a millstone around Republicans running in the industrial Midwest. It was not a popular piece of legislation, and in some ways I think it's almost better that it didn't pass and that it didn't go into effect, causing even more damage down the road.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that Republicans as a party need to understand who their constituency is. It's different from what it was a generation ago. It really is a middle-class party. Maybe they should have middle-class economic solutions to offer.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Tucker. I think that a lot of folks, especially the Wall Street wing of the Republican Party, don't like to admit and don't like to appreciate the fact that the party has definitely shifted in this direction. You've got more and more working class voters voting for Republicans. Like I said, more and more wealthy suburbanites voting for Democrats. And to me, what's ultimately causing that is that those voters are incredibly socially progressive, meaning those wealthy suburbanites are socially progressive. And what you hear consistently from Republican elites is that we need to moderate on the social issues and chart a really libertarian course on the economic issues. And if you actually listen to Republican voters, what they're saying is something like the opposite. They're socially conservative. Yes. They like the president's views on immigration. They like the president's views on abortion. What they want us to do is stop hemorrhaging jobs to folks overseas. They want us to win trade wars against Mexico and especially the Chinese. And that agenda is ultimately, I think, where Republican success in the future lies. But like you said, Republican elites have to accept that fact. And I think, we should be proud of the coalition that we have and try to build on it as opposed to being ashamed of that fact.
But I mean, how do you have a party run by people with the mirror image views of their own voters? So the people who run the party are socially liberal and economically libertarian. The voters are economic nationalists and social conservatives. I mean, how can they be in the same party?
Well, I think the long-term answer may be that they may not be in the same party. But at the end of the day, the voters have the power. We saw that in the 2016 election. Tucker, I'm sure you remember after a few of the Republican primary debates, there were a lot of professional conservatives, a lot of establishment Republicans who would go on TV and say this or that thing that Donald Trump said would eliminate his chances. He blew himself out of the water. He'll never be the Republican nominee. But after each time he said something that he wasn't supposed to say, he actually got more popular among the Republican base. So to me, the question is not how do these two groups coexist? The question is, do the voters ultimately have the power in the Republican Party? Exactly. I think the answer is obviously yes. It just may take a little while for that to unfold.
Is it a democracy or not? You're right. That is the deepest question always. J.D. Vance, so smart. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
We have lots more from Tucker tonight. We'll look at the threat from big tech and China's role in the fentanyl. Hey, everybody, welcome back. You're watching a live special edition of Tucker Carlson tonight, Inside the Issues. We now go back to Tucker as he investigates the frightening power of big tech.
The man behind the book and the film Clinton Cash, which exposed the Clinton Foundation's pay-for-play relationships with many foreign governments, has a new film out. This time, the target is big tech. Here's a preview of it.
They can suppress certain types of results based on what they think you should be seeing, based on what your followers are presenting.
It's what Google and Facebook are doing on a regular basis by suppressing stories, by steering us towards other stories rather than the stories we're actually seeking.
It will always favor one online music service over another and one candidate over another. Google crosses the creepy line every day.
Peter Schweitzer is one of the people behind this new documentary. It's called The Creepy Line, and it premiered this week. He joins us on set. Peter, thank you very much for coming on. So why should we care what Google, a private company, is doing?
Because they have an amazing amount of influence on the consumption of information and news in this country. 80 to 90% of searches are done through Google. And Google not only collects information on us, which threatens our privacy, but they use that information to manipulate us, to steer us in directions we don't want to go. It's affecting the voting that's taking place in this country. And some people are arguing it's determining the outcome of elections.
Well, so how could you have a meaningful democracy where the people rule in the face of corporate power this concentrated?
Well, look, the mantra has always been you've got to have an informed electorate, right? The electorate needs to know what's going on. Well, the problem is if you have voters who are not high information voters, but they want to vote, and they're going to go to Google to guide them in the week before an election, and those results are skewed, and there's overwhelming academic evidence that they manipulate search results, you're going to have an electorate that is strongly influenced by the result. That undermines democracy. The fundamental problem is that people don't recognize that. They don't understand they're being manipulated. And unless something is done about it, the future of the republic is under threat.
Yeah, you can't have a democracy under those circumstances. Yeah. But just to back up, you said there's overwhelming academic evidence that Google manipulates its search results. They deny that.
Yes, they do. And here's the interesting thing, Tucker. They've denied this before. You remember 10 years ago or so, Yelp and some of these other companies, TripAdvisors, were accusing Google of manipulating the algorithm to suppress them in search results and to push Google-related companies. And Google said, absolutely not. These results are organic. We now know the Federal Trade Commission, the European Union, and academics at Harvard said that's wrong. You were manipulating the algorithm. Their defense now is the same when it comes to political speech. The problem is that there's been numerous peer-reviewed studies done by Robert Epstein and others that clearly demonstrates they are suppressing news stories. And in fact, in the 2016 election, they found in all 10 search results from 1 through 10, Google was suppressing negative stories about Hillary Clinton and pushing positive stories about pushing negative stories about Donald Trump. This by a researcher, by the way, who was a Hillary Clinton supporter, not a Trump supporter.
This seems like the story of the century.
Yes, it's huge story, and overlooked because it's confusing, it's difficult to understand, and it's happening behind the curtain. It's the Wizard of Oz behind the Iron Curtain. We're used to thinking about, Dan Rather, media bias. He makes a snarky comment. He makes a comment about George Bush. That's visible for everyone to see. This kind of bias is hidden. We don't know what we don't know, and that's what makes it so frightening.
It's a remarkable story and a remarkable documentary. Thank you, Peter Schweitzer. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Wow, more great stuff from Tucker there, obviously. Tucker also recently sat down with a U.S. senator to investigate the deadly threat of synthetic drugs from China.
More than 70,000 Americans died of drug ODs last year. Nearly half of those overdosed on synthetic opioids like fentanyl. President Trump has signed legislation that should make it harder to ship drugs like fentanyl through the mail. Will that be enough? The #1 manufacturer of fentanyl is China. They seem uninterested in stemming the flow of illegal drugs into our country. So the question is, if China killed 30,000 Americans through bombing campaigns or by invading, of course, we might respond differently. Senator Rob Portman is one of the few who's been on this topic for a while. He's just introduced legislation. The president just signed it, and he joins us tonight. Senator, thanks very much for coming.
Tucker, thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. So it is, I think, a fair question. 3,000 Americans died in 9/11. We're at war for 17 years. 30,000 died just last year because of this, and it seems to be all but unnoticed here in Washington.
I agree. It's the underreported story out there, and it's not that people don't care about it. They do. When I'm home, I hear about it all the time. We have our teletown hall meetings every month. I ask a question, how many of you have been directly affected? It's always more than half of the callers. This is, 10, 20,000 callers. So it's a huge issue. Sadly, Ohio is one of the states that's been hardest hit.
Yes.
#1 killer, fentanyl. 2/3 of our overdose deaths last year were from fentanyl. It's a synthetic form of opioids, and we know where it's coming from, China, and we know where it's coming in through, and that's the United States Postal Service, a government agency. So what we have done over the past 3 years, we've researched it, we've investigated it, we've put together legislation. It took us too long to get it done because there was some pushback, particularly from the post office. In fact, there still is. But all we're asking them to do is to screen packages so that our law enforcement can at least stop some of this poison coming into our communities and raise the price of this incredibly powerful, deadly drug on the streets of our cities, of our communities, and also reduce the cost.
Well, good for you, and bless you for raising it and making noise about it consistently. What can the U.S. do to change its posture toward China to put some pressure on the Chinese government to clamp down within their country?
Well, it's a good question. I've met with the Chinese ambassador here. I've met with the Chinese leadership there. I've raised it consistently. What they have said is two things. One, that they have made some of the precursors, in other words, the chemicals that go into making fentanyl, illegal. They have, in effect, scheduled them under, the way we would do it here, and that they've begun, they say, secondly, to crack down on some of these chemical companies that are producing it. But what they have done has not been effective. I mean, it continues to come in. Our investigation indicated that if you send something by the Postal Service from China, that it's guaranteed delivery. If you send it through one of the other carriers, say FedEx or UPS or DHL, a private carrier, it's not guaranteed. Why? Because after 9/11, we required all the private carriers to provide advanced electronic data to law enforcement to be able to identify suspect packages and to be able to stop this stuff coming in. We didn't do it for the post office. We said, you ought to study it, come back to us with the report. They never have.
Blue Ribbon Commission. When we've talked about this with guest after guest on the show, the response I get almost every time is, well, it's America's fault because it's our users who are consuming these drugs and dying after becoming addicted to them. Do you think it's America's fault that 30,000 people are dying of synthetic opioids?
It's both. We have obviously a demand issue here. Right. We have a demand for drug that's insatiable, seemingly, but we also have this incredibly inexpensive poison coming onto our streets, into our communities, mostly from China, mostly through the Postal Service. So by reducing that supply, we can impact this. I believe, Tucker, that over the last few years, we've done a lot, some with congressional legislation, some at the local level, to push back on the opioid crisis. And we would be seeing some progress already, but for fentanyl. In other words, it has overwhelmed the system. Right. 4,000% increase in fentanyl overdose deaths in Ohio in the last 5 years. When I first got started on this a few years ago, fentanyl was not a big deal. Now it is. And I think it has, in effect, kept us from making the progress we otherwise would have made with prevention, education, with more treatment, better recovery programs, more first responders having Narcan to save lives, the miracle drug that reverses the effects of an overdose. So I think we're going to begin to see some progress if we can stem this flow of fentanyl.
And very quick, as a matter of public consciousness, how different do you think this would be if this drug were coming from Russia rather than China?
I think coming from anywhere, it should be something we care a lot about.
Well, I agree with you completely.
Yeah, and I think we should be tougher, and I think we should actually be saying to the Chinese, in this case, you've got to crack down in your own country, both for our purposes, and if you don't, as I have told Premier Li in person, who's the second-ranking leader over in China, it's going to be in your communities too. I mean, this stuff is so deadly, and it is so addictive that it's something that you should care about as well.
Senator, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tucker. Thanks for following this, and thanks for raising the awareness on this issue.
70,000 people die. It's worth paying attention to, I think. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, we have a lot more of Tucker just ahead as our Inside the Issues special continues. Up next, he'll dig into the threat that concussions pose to the NFL. Plus, we'll look at how corporations are imposing their own brand of gun control on America. You don't want to miss that. Stay right there. All righty, everybody. Welcome back to our special Inside the Issues edition of Tucker Carlson tonight. Now, tens of millions of Americans watched NFL games yesterday as part of the holiday festivities. But that long tradition could be in danger thanks to concussions. Horrible. In 2015, the NFL reached a settlement with former players who said concussions left them with long-term disabilities. Tucker recently sat down with a lawyer for those former players who says the NFL is fighting tooth and nail to avoid paying out the settlements it agreed to. Here's what happened.
Patrick Tiki, thanks very much for joining us. I appreciate it. So I know from watching the national anthem controversy that the NFL as an organization has a deep social conscience. And yet I'm finding that hard to square with, I think, your allegation that they're refusing to pay players who were injured during service in the NFL. Am I mischaracterizing that?
Only in the sense that, no, I think you're characterizing it correctly. I don't think the NFL is in favor of the kneeling. You think they are?
No, I'm just mocking, because we've seen statements about how, they care a lot about people, and yet if what you're saying is right, it sounds like they're trying to stiff people with grave physical injuries. Is that right?
Yes, they want to look good. They want to look good but not be good. Absolutely.
So, I mean, give us the overview of what you think is happening here.
So in this concussion settlement case, I could talk to you about my players. I have 90 clients, and 95% of my players are African American, 5% are white. None of them have been paid. I've submitted 41 claims, and 38 of them are in audit for fraud. Over 99% of the players that are in audit for fraud are African American. And I just believe that if this were a group of retired white golfers, they would have been paid already. But
so let's take. I mean, those are claims that are pretty hard to verify unless you have something in writing. I assume you don't. Let's get to the physical facts of it. Are these players demonstrably injured?
Yes.
Okay. Did the NFL know that what they were doing posed a physical risk to them for CTE?
Well, the allegation, the complaint was that they and Rydell, helmet maker, knew the damages that they were causing to brains since the 1960s.
Huh. And
they settled this case because